Hello and welcome to the Missouri A&OER Symposium. My name is Jaleh Fazelian. I'm the Associate Dean of Libraries at the University of Missouri St. Louis, and I'm here to introduce one of our very first sessions this morning, OER Design, Creating Functional and Interactive Open Textbooks. By our presenter, Judy Schmitt. Before I introduce Judy, though, we have a couple of just technical details that everyone needs to understand. Live captioning is available for this presentation. Please find the link located under the Handouts tab. This session will be recorded and provided within the event portal following the symposium and should be up for 6 months. A copy of the presentation will also be provided in the Handouts tab. Please enter all questions in the live Q&A box. We will do our best to answer them as they are received. And we encourage you all to engage with other attendees through the discussion forum. We will be asking some poll questions throughout the session, and you'll be able to participate with those under the polls tab. If you have any technical issues, the MEC staff are behind the scenes to provide support. Be sure to reach out through the live support button. And now to our presentation. Judy Schmitt is a librarian at the University of Missouri St. Louis, and before obtaining her MLS in 2017, Judy spent 25 years in the publishing industry as a layout professional and designer of higher education textbooks. Her last few years in the industry were focused on preparing books for digital publications. And so now I turn things over to Judy.
Hello, everybody. I'm happy to have you here with me today, and I'm excited for this presentation. It's really taking me home. This is what I kind of grew up with, textbook design and layout, and I'm happy to share what I know with you. As Jaleh mentioned, I am a reference librarian at UMSL. I spent a good deal of time as a book designer and layout pro, mostly focused on InDesign. I did textbooks mainly in the medical sciences and hard sciences like chemistry, biochemistry, that kind of thing. So I am familiar with a lot of different aspects of the book production world, and I'm happy to share. These are two of the titles that I've worked on since I've been at UMSL, just doing layout OERs for faculty members. The one on the left was a recent publication by Kate Votaw, and the other one is by Manon Allard-Kropp in a communications field. So I would like to know who you are. What is your role in your institution, and what is your interest in OER creation? Are you faculty, librarian, instructional designer, graduate assistant, or other? And if you want to put your institution name in the chat, that would be great. I'll just give you a few minutes to take care of that. Also, if you have any difficulties that you're running into in terms of designing or creating your OERs, that would be of interest as well. Okay, great. Just in the interest of full disclosure, I am working on my laptop and I have my presentation at full screen, so I can't see anything that you all are doing. So give me some cues.
It looks like we have a good mix of folks. We have 24% teaching faculty, 60% librarians, 12% instructional designers, and 4% are other.
Great. I'm curious what those other people are. All right. Well, I'll move on. So let's see. What we're going to cover today, I've broken this presentation into 3 different sections. The first one is function. Helping your users get the most out of your OER, students and faculty, other faculty. Then we'll move on to the appearance, how to reduce the yuck factor in your books. And then thirdly, accessibility. I'll just be touching on this, but I have another presentation tomorrow on OER accessibility. So I encourage you to join me for that one as well. So attractive. So paying attention to how functional and aesthetically pleasing your OER is, learn from it, but want to learn from it. In addition to functionality and design, like I said, we're going to briefly touch on accessibility. My presentation tomorrow is called One Size Does Not Fit All. And let's just move forward. Oh, and you'll notice that I have kind of split this into the three sections at the top. And I'll kind of touch on this as part of a design method that you can use as well. So for formats and file types, the first thing you need to think about when considering function is the format, whether it's printed or easily printable or electronic. To determine which one best suits your students' needs, consider what sort of content you'll be sharing. Is it going to be mainly text and images? Is it going to have mathematical or chemical equations or complex tables, video or audio files, or maybe even practice tests or forms? You're going to also want to think about how your students are likely to interact with the content. Are they going to want to print the text before reading? A lot of people with older eyes like to do that. Are they going to read on a small device like a phone or a tablet? Maybe they can't afford a full desktop computer. Are they going to search for key terms throughout the book? That's one hint that you might want to lean toward electronic so that they can just do the search on the phone or their computer instead of flipping through a book to find the key terms. Are they going to be programming code to copy and paste? If they're in a computer science program and you're wanting them to copy and paste programming code, it's a whole lot easier to do in electronic than to key it all in from scratch. And then are they going to follow a lot of hyperlinks? Do you have links to other sources that you want to provide? Maybe they're not open sources, but you still want to include the title of them in your OER. That's a possibility. So then file types. We have PDFs. PDFs can be read online and HTML can be printed. So there's a little overlap on this. The way I've broken it down here is the main use for these particular file types. So HTML is sometimes printed, but it's always electronic. PDF is sometimes electronic, that you look at it on your phone or your device, but it is primarily meant to be printed. So PDFs are easy to use and print. Students are familiar with that format. It can be created from a number of applications like Word or things like that. But if you're wanting text to be resized by the user, PDFs can't do that. So they're not good for small screens because in order to be a size that's legible, the user can only see a very small portion of that PDF. They can also be hard to edit or update, which is going to be a concern that I'll bring up a little bit later. Moving on to the electronic files, HTMLs, the fundamental difference between PDF and HTML is that PDFs are made with a layout in mind so that they're going to be always in a specific layout. But an HTML is made with the structure of the document in mind, or at least it should be. So if you're not tied to your layout, HTML is a great option. In HTML, content is either created using the HTML code, coding it from scratch, which is pretty time consuming, and requires a little bit of knowledge, or you can create the content in another file and export to an HTML file that opens in your browser window. These can be a fast and easy alternative to an ebook, but unless you know how to adjust the code or work with CSS or cascading style sheets, the default styles can mean readability could suffer, because sometimes HTMLs will open in your browser window and the text goes all the way across the window, which can be hard to track, for eyes. Then we've got web books. I've listed Pressbooks as one possibility. There is a free Pressbooks option, but it doesn't have a whole lot of options for publications. So you might check to see if your institution has Pressbooks. Pressbooks is based on WordPress, and it's designed specifically with book structure in mind. And it can be hosted either online or exported to one of several ebook formats. And then speaking of ebooks, these can be accessed from many free e-readers, such as Adobe Digital Editions or Calibre or Calibre if you want to be fancy. EPUB is the most widely supported ebook format. It's built to be navigated similarly to HTML. It allows accessible content, including videos and math equations via MathML. And it comes in two different flavors. You can have reflowable, which is what most people are used to when they read ebooks, where they can resize the text themselves. And these are good for text-heavy books with a lot of text and some illustrations. Then you can also have a fixed layout, which is similar to a PDF, and that's good for complex books with a lot of boxes and tables. EPUB cannot be created directly from MS Word, Microsoft Word, so that may be a concern for you. And then we have Kindle or Mobi. Kindle uses its own proprietary format called Mobi and has its own publishing guidelines. So a lot of students assume that they can read their ebooks on Kindle, and that's not necessarily the case. Ebook creation does require a bit of extra training beyond simply learning layout. So there are places that you can go for this. Lynda.com is one easily accessed site that offers training on how to build EPUBs. Okay, so moving on to software. We've got three different types. You can use word processors such as Microsoft Word or the old WordPerfect. Some people still prefer that one. These word processors are the least expensive and have the shortest learning curve, but you'll have a hard time controlling layout on them. It's hard to get pictures to land exactly where you want them on the page. Then there's layout programs, which is what I use. I started using Quark Express in my career and then moved on to Adobe InDesign about 15 years ago. And layout programs offer complete control of layout, but they're very expensive and they may be difficult to learn. If you have any questions on InDesign, I am more than happy to help you. I love working in the program, but I will admit there's a lot to it. And sometimes it can be overkill for what you need. Then we have hybrids like Microsoft Publisher, Kindle Create, and Apple's Pages. Hybrids fall in the middle in terms of cost and learning curve, but you may not see the range of options you'd find in either of the other types of software. So what software do you guys use when it comes to document creation? Go ahead and answer that poll if you haven't already. Oh, I did want to mention too that the LMS, I guess I don't have a Canvas subscription, so I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming you could create content in the LMS, which is why I included it. I wouldn't advise it, but you can.
Judy, just to
Yeah.
let you know, I'm sorry, my email just went off, but the software use is 52% Microsoft Word, 40% Google Docs, and then 4% inside of an LMS, and 4% for Adobe InDesign.
Wow. Okay. That's more than I was expecting. All right. Great. Thank you all for participating. Okay. So we're going to want to develop a cohesive project, which means consistency, repetition, and hierarchy. These three elements train your students to expect certain things from your book. They're especially important for OERs adapted from multiple sources. You're going to have to really give some thought to how you're tying your product together. I'm not going to go into real close detail on the image here, but you can definitely check it out if you download this presentation. Consistency, you're going to want to apply to structure. So if you have key takeaways in one chapter, you're going to want them in all your chapters, or delete them in the one. Do what's easiest for you. Headings and terminology should also be consistent. So in if one chapter says exercises and another one says critical thinking exercises, your students may notice this, but they may not. If they do notice it, they may wonder, what's the difference? Also, if you're using healthcare in one chapter as one word, and then in another chapter it's 2 words, then you're going to want to kind of clean that up as well. These are things that the faculty that I've worked with haven't given a lot of thought to, but when I've gone through and designed it, I've kind of taken care of some of these things myself. Also, you're going to want to be consistent with your citation styles. So if you're picking up one chapter that has citations in APA format and another one uses MLA format, your students are going to prefer probably one type over another. You want to apply repetition to important concepts, repeat them to kind of drill them into your students' brains. And you're going to want to repeat frequently used elements. So if you have definitions as sidebars, you're going to want to continue that throughout the product. You're also going to want to apply hierarchy to concepts so that new knowledge builds on existing knowledge. And then also headings. So your structure tree. You want to follow a consistent structure throughout your product. And don't skip headings. So don't follow a first level heading with a third level heading. You're going to want to make it 1, 2, 3. Okay, so student use, making things easier for the students or more predictable. So your table of contents is going to be handy for a printed book, but it's also going to be useful for electronic documents, especially when accessibility isn't concerned. You can apply, you can't tell because I didn't color it, but the topics in the table of contents image, those all link directly to their headings in the text. So it's easy for students to skim through this table of contents and jump directly to the topic that they want. Let's see. Pedagogical aids can include learning objectives, key terms, chapter summaries, and exercises. These are also called pedagogical features. Each of the key terms shown in this list which appears on the chapter opener, is a hyperlink to the bold color counterpart in the text. And that color counterpart, that bolded term, appears wherever the term is defined. A lot of beginning authors will bold the term the first time it appears, but then if it's defined three pages later, your student's not going to necessarily make that leap. And if your key terms are not defined in your text, I would definitely try to do that, because that helps with student retention. Currency of content. If your text outlines the history of the LGBT legislation, but doesn't mention the legalization of same-sex marriage in 2015, then you have the responsibility of adding that content. Don't just assume that because you're picking up a book that it's complete. Textbooks always need to be updated. You know, things in the world are always changing. You're going to want to make connections between topics. These aren't built in when you're pulling content from multiple sources, so you need to do that for the student. Keep an eye out for legacy cross-references that are meaningless in your OER. So if your OER mentions chapter 8, but it only has 4 chapters, then your student's going to be confused because you haven't gone through and cleaned that up. Also, if you're picking up something from chapter 11 of your source material and you've numbered it to chapter 4, then you're going to want to renumber all of your figures and tables and things. All right, so indexes. This is part of the thumb index that I mentioned here, is kind of similar to what I've used at the tops of these things. Thumb index is what you commonly see in dictionaries, the way where that little notch is cut out of the thumb, where the thumbs go. That's what I've always called the thumb margin, the outer margin of your page or your spreads. So the thumb index can be helpful in some cases, but note that if students are printing your books, chances are they're not going to be doing it professionally, which means the pages aren't going to be trimmed, so the colors aren't going to bleed off the edge. So those thumb indexes may be helpful for online use, for PDFs that people are viewing online, but not necessarily if they're printed. Let's see. And a regular index is not absolutely necessary for your OER, even electronic, because students can run searches for the key terms, but the index will offer more granularity and context between terms. Okay, so for faculty reuse, a lot of people, when they create OERs, they think about their students, but hopefully you're going to share your OERs with other faculty in other institutions around the country and around the world. So you're going to want to make sure that the OER that you create and share is usable by that faculty. The references are a big thing. These should make it easy for others to find your sources, so don't overlook them. And make sure that you go through the references, because a lot of times what am I trying to say? Oh, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Anyway, so you're going to want to make them a consistent style, as I mentioned earlier, and look up the DOIs to help your users. I did one book where nothing was, no DOIs were mentioned at all. And the 7th edition of APA requires DOIs whenever possible. Also, you're going to want to check for dead links and update them. As I said, everything changes in the world. So it's possible that a link that your source material mentioned is no longer active. And so you want to make sure to eliminate those if you need to. And when you're when you're creating or adapting your OER, you don't need to consult only open sources for your research. I had one book that one chapter was used that all they did was pick up Wikipedia articles, but they didn't put the date that they accessed those Wikipedia articles. So when I tried to find that that topic to read up more about it, I couldn't find it because I didn't know where. Good idea if you're using Wikipedia entries to check the view history feature and then cite the archived version that you accessed. You're going to want to make your source files available because PDFs are notoriously bad at editing or difficult to edit. You're going to want to make these available as your original documents. So if you created it in Microsoft Word, don't just make the PDF available, but even if you don't share the Word document with everybody, at least have it handy on your computer so that if you're contacted by another faculty saying, I would love to use your work, but I can't access the original document to edit it, then you can share the Word file with them. Okay, and also keep in mind, like I said, you're going to have to update your own document occasionally as well. So you're going to want access to your own source files. Okay, before we move on to appearance, does anybody have any questions, Jaleh?
So far, there are no questions in the live Q&A or in the discussion forum.
All right, that's fine. I just figured this would be a good time to break.
All right.
Okay, so moving on to page design and colors. Page design is particularly important for printable OERs. You want to make it easy on the eyes. And I have two examples here. One book that I did that was 1 column, and the other is 2 column. In the 1 column book, I used larger type. That's because when I was beginning my layout career, I was told that if you use 10-point type, the width of your text area should be no wider than 30 picas, which is 5 inches. For those who don't know, a pica is 1/6 of an inch. So it kind of uses the 12, the unit, broken into 12s. So converting that then to 12-point type, which is what this left image is set at, that means it should be no longer or 6 inches, which would be an 1.25 inch margin on each side. And I've cropped this so you can't tell that that's what it is. But so then your leading. The leading is what Microsoft Word calls, line spacing. Leading is the area from one baseline of text to the next baseline of text. Usually we want to keep it at 120% of the size of the text. So if you use 10-point type, it would be 12-point leading. And that's what this is over here on the right-hand image. If you use 12-point type, rounding up, it's 15-point leading. Leading, Word's auto leading isn't really ideal because a lot of times you'll see that if you use subscripts or superscripts, it'll increase the leading a bit, or at least it used to. I don't know what it does now. Also, if you wanted to add a little breathing room, you could increase the leading by a little bit. You'll see on the left image, we used ragged right with no hyphenation, but for the right image, we used justified text and hyphenation. You want to make sure that you use widow and orphan control. The way I learned it, widows are lines of text that aren't the complete width, so that you only have one of those at the top of a column. That's something you want to avoid. You always want to keep at least 2 lines of text at the top and the bottom for each paragraph. Orphans, on the other hand, are just short words at the end of a paragraph. So you want to end with at least 2 words, or I usually tried to if it was a single word, it had to be at least 8 letters, 8 characters wide. Also, with 1 column text, you can use ragged bottoms. That's when you don't necessarily need to align anything. So a lot of times when I'm building, I concentrate on spreads, which admittedly these days, if you're looking at it electronically, a lot of times you see 1 page at a time. But in a printed book, you open it to a 2-page spread. So alignment is very important. Let's see what else. In 2-column text, your columns can be equal width, as I have them here, or you can do a major column with a minor sidebar column. And this minor sidebar column can include either headings or small images or sidebar text. Let's see. The minor column, it should be at least 9 picas, which is an 1.5 inches. Just because it can be difficult to fit words if it's shorter than that and you're using kind of large type. You want to make sure that it's easily readable. Let's see. Okay. When you justify and hyphenate, the words should be at least 6 letters that you hyphenate, and there should be at least 2 letters before the hyphen at the end of a line and 3 letters after the hyphen at the beginning of a line. For narrow columns, don't either hyphenate or don't justify at all, because otherwise you get that newspaper look with the gigantic spaces between words. It's not conducive to readability for one thing. You can see here on the second image, I used paragraph indents of, I believe this was 1/4 inch. And the 1 column image, you can see that I used a little extra space between paragraphs instead. And that's mostly for readability because it's easier. Let's see. Okay, so for colors, a lot of times I would create books in CMYK, which is a 4-color printing. And that CMYK is best for printable files. But RGB, which is what your computer uses, is best for electronic files because it's a mix of light, whereas CMYK is a mix of ink. RGB can be printed, but the colors don't convert seamlessly. So what looks bright on your screen can look dull when printed. Books can be either 1 color, usually all black with grayscale images, 2 color, usually black with 1 other color, such as red, with either grayscale or duotone images, or they can be full 4 color, which is the full range of colors, CMYK. Stay away from neon bright colors. They're not going to print neon bright either, but they're not going to be easily parsed by your eyes as well. Make sure that there's enough contrast for people with low vision, and avoid setting text in any shade of yellow or any pastel color unless it's on a dark background. Again, that's a contrast issue. For visual interest, you're going to want to break up your text with images, tables, and boxes. And captions, box text, and table text can be set in a slightly smaller type size. Put the figures and tables and boxes as close as possible to the first mention, but preferably not on the page before. So there are a lot of rules about this in the publishing industry, and a lot of times it's by public. It's not one size fits all, but you want to make it easy for your students to find what you're referring to. It shouldn't be too far away.
Judy, it's a good time to interrupt you with a question. There's a question that came in that said, is there a guide or preferred style for different levels of students? For example, undergraduate versus graduate. Has any research been done on the preferences between these different types of students? And is one more accessible than the other, 2 columns versus 1 column?
I have not seen any studies, but I will say that when I was working on undergrad science books, we did it in 2 column with 10-point type, which is similar to the image on the right. I very seldom saw anything that was 1 column unless the page size was so small that it made 2 column text impractical. Hopefully that answers your question. A lot of OERs, though, are 1 column, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Here, to read 1 column, although there's not as much opportunity for visual interest, I don't think. So if you have more questions about that, I'd be happy to get your email and follow up with you on that. Okay, I'm going to move on to typefaces and fonts. I love typefaces, and I've used both terms here. The way I was taught, a typeface is the entire family, whereas a font would be like the bold part of a family of typefaces, if that makes sense. Typefaces usually limit yourself to 2, 1 serif and 1 sans serif, but you can use multiple weights or fonts within each typeface. Your serif fonts are going to be like the first 2 images here. They include those serifs, those little embellishments at the edges of certain parts of the letter. These are sometimes called Roman, although Roman also means the opposite of italic. So if you want to make something not italic, you say make it Roman. Generally, these have been considered easier to read for most people than sans serif when used at small typefaces. There is some controversy about this. Maybe it's easier just because people are more used to seeing it. So that now that they're looking on the web and seeing a lot of sans serif faces, maybe now those are easier to read. So it's kind of an individual preference. Let's see. You're going to want to pay attention to the X height. The X height is, you can see that there's a slight difference between the serif and the sans serif in terms of X height. Sans serif typefaces are also called Gothic or grotesque, and sometimes their italics are called oblique, just so you're aware of the different terminology. And sans really good for headings, chapter titles, that kind of thing. Let's see. And you're going to want to look at the italics of the fonts you choose. This one, I chose this one because the Q doesn't really look like a Q, especially if you're, reading a an alphabet that you're not familiar with. This looks like a funky 2 to me. And you can see that the X height is drastically different here than it is in the Roman version. You're also going to want to look at the thinness of the thins. So the crossbar in the E, if you're creating this using that font and a student makes a photocopy of it, that thin is going to completely disappear and legibility is going to suffer. All right. Other typeface categories that you may encounter are script, handwriting, and ornamental typefaces. These are best avoided in academic writing and websites, to be honest. Never ever use all caps with script typefaces because they're very hard to read. Monospace typefaces can be used if you have snippets of computer code. Okay, and then moving on to numbers. We've got old style numbers, which are using ascenders and descenders. And then lining numbers are the full cap height. Let's see, if you have the option, you're going to want to use proportional spacing in running text, but tabular spacing when numbers need to align, such as in stacked equations or tables. Proportional spacing in some sans serif fonts is very tight, especially around the number 1, which you can see here. It's different than the different than this one, the tabular spacing. Okay, heading hierarchy. There's a lot you can do to a heading to differentiate it from a different. You can use color. So you'll generally begin with an eye-catching color like red maybe, and move toward colors that are more subtle as the heading level, well, I don't know, does it increase or decrease when it goes up in number? If you're moving from a first level heading to a 6th level heading, your 6th level heading is going to be a subtler, closer to black color. Note that the color use can be an issue for colorblind readers. So you're going to want to use a different way of differentiating it as well. So you can use a different typeface perhaps. So maybe you'll start with sans serif fonts and then switch to serif around level 4 or 5. You're going to decrease the size of your headings as you go throughout them. So start your number 1 heading will be a larger font than your number 6 heading. You can also use different fonts within the typeface. So generally you start with bold, then move to bold italic, and then Roman. Capitalization. The preferred method is all caps for the higher levels, and then main words up, or title case as Microsoft Word calls it, and then initial cap. So you have just the first letter of the heading would be cap. Small caps are sometimes used, but to me, they kind of look dated. I used them when I first started my career 25 years ago. So then also you can differentiate heads with indentation. So start flush left and then end up on the paragraph indent. To obtain typefaces, you can go to Google Fonts or Adobe Fonts, and there are like a gazillion other font shops online that are available. The best format that you want to look for is OpenType, which has the extension of OTF. This includes an expanded character set and it provides cross-platform compatibility. The next common and useful one is TrueType, which is what most of our Microsoft Word subscriptions come with by default. You're going to want to examine the character set of any TrueType font before you purchase it. Because if you use foreign diacritical marks, they may not necessarily be included. There's also Adobe PostScript or Type 1 fonts. These aren't supported by web browsers, and Adobe is going to disable their support for authoring with those fonts by 2023. So they're moving away from those. In terms of licensing, licenses are determined by individual foundries and online font shops. So even free fonts aren't necessarily free. A license upgrade may be necessary if you want to embed in an EPUB. So keep that in mind as well. Embedded fonts in embed your fonts in PDFs so that whoever downloads it will see the pages as you intended. Typefaces for EPUB, typefaces are encrypted on export to EPUB, and then the E-Rater unencrypts them with varying degrees of success. So that's another concern. And that was a major slide. I should have broken that up. Sorry about that. So your image considerations. Images can be either raster or vector. Raster images have the extensions JPEG, PNG or PNG, GIF, and TIFF. These are created using pixels and cannot be dramatically enlarged without looking more and more pixelated. As you can see here, the smaller circles are how they look at a small size, but when you zoom in, this is what it looks like. It's rasterized. Keep that in mind when considering accessibility, because users with low vision may end up zooming in and seeing only blurry images. Vector images, on the other hand, mentions EPS, SVG, PDF, AI for Adobe Illustrator, and PSD for Photoshop document. Those are created using mathematical formulas, and they can be scaled to any dimension without worry about resolution. So that's what's used most of the time for logos. If you're putting in a logo as a JPEG, it's going to rasterize. So you want to try to track down the vector if you can. These are also good for creating graphs and charts. Resolution. A lot of people interchange the DPI and PPI. DPI stands for dots per inch and is a legacy from the printing world. So it's the dots of ink per inch. And then PPI is pixels per inch. Essentially, these days, they are kind of used interchangeably. So I'm going to use what you most likely see online. If you want to print something or have it printable by your students, you're going to want to have images at least 300 PPI. And the way to figure that out is to take the number of inches times 300. So if you've got a 6x4 image, you're going to multiply the 6 and the 4 by 300, and the image size that you want to look for is 1800 by 1200. That can be a little bit tricky when you're looking for images that you already want to have, a Creative Commons license. You can't just go into Google and find images to use in your work. It has to be openly licensed.
I'm going to pause for just a second and tell you that you have 10 minutes left. And,
okay.
And someone brought up in the discussion forum, it's not really a question, but how do you handle red-green color blindness when you're creating these OER textbooks?
Yeah, that is something that I'm going to refer you to my next presentation tomorrow morning at 10:30, because I'm going to actually give you some advice on ways to see this online, kind of simulators that will simulate color blindness in various different types of color blindness. So stay tuned. Okay. All right. So I've got to really speed it up here. Okay. Reducing the image's dimensions will increase its resolution. So that's like this. If you reduce this, you're going to get something that looks like this. It's going to look like it's a higher resolution because it's smaller. Make sure that you always either crop a photo or constrain its dimensions to keep from stretching it. Image licenses. You're going to want to look for Creative Commons licenses, or it's a reasonable facsimile of a Creative Commons license. Check all your images, even the ones that you picked up from another source, because it's very common for something that used to be on Flickr to no longer be on Flickr. So meaning it's maybe the author has changed its Creative Commons license. So you can't just assume that everything that you pick is still going to be open. Public domain means that the copyrights have expired, been forfeited, or are inapplicable. Just because you find an image on the internet doesn't mean it's in the public domain. Many of the pics on Google Images have been pirated. I mean, many. Royalty-free does not necessarily mean free. Usually you'll pay a one-time fee to obtain the rights to use the image as many times as you like. But you don't need to pay the royalty to the owner each time you use it. And then I've got a link here to attribution best practices. I'm not going to go into them too deeply here. Just follow the link to get more information. And then for accessibility, I'm just going to kind of outline the high points. You're going to want to put in alt text in so that your readers can look at an image and read what that image is. They should be short descriptions of the image, and they should be in. If you're like I'll mention tomorrow, if your book is on architecture, there's no need to mention a juggler outside the Louvre. Just mention the building in your alt text. And you don't need to say image of. So just say the Louvre, not an image of the Louvre. Let's see, then paragraph styles. These are important because they help screen readers navigate the content, and they also make your formatting a lot easier. So get to know how to apply paragraph styles and how to modify paragraph styles. That's pretty important as well. If you need help on that, I can help. Also use the list button. Because screen readers will announce how many items are in the list before it reads them if they're set up correctly. You're going to want to use meaningful hyperlinks so that your readers can jump from link to link by hitting a tab, or they can press a hotkey to bring up a list of available links using a screen reader. Links should be clear and concise descriptions of what the user will see on the linked page. Each link should stand alone and serve as a call to action. Color and contrast, as I mentioned earlier, don't rely on color alone to differentiate elements. You'll use shapes, patterns, and text equivalents. This is of primary importance in images when you have graphs and tables. There's a lot of different rules on accessibility of graphs and tables that a lot of the images that are out there in open works aren't really following. They're not very accessible. And as I mentioned, there are free color contrast analyzers and color blindness simulators. Sensory characteristics. That means don't rely on spatial relationships, size, position, or color to describe elements or advise users on how to interact with their content. Instead, use a text equivalent. So say refer to figure 3.2 instead of the figure below. For tables, you're going to want to define your column and row headers so that users of screen readers can successfully orient themselves from within each cell. It'll tell them, you know, this is what you're reading in this cell, and it's in this column, in this row. Complex tables can only be made accessible within HTML or Acrobat Pro. And then regarding some of these issues, you're going to see this accessibility checker. This is Microsoft Word's accessibility checker. There's also an accessibility checker in PowerPoint. And then if you're creating PDFs are a whole other ball of wax when it comes to accessibility. So there's a lot that needs to be talked about in that. And that's part of what I'm going to go into in my accessibility presentation tomorrow.
Judy, I'm just going to interrupt you one more time real quick. You have 4 minutes and 15 seconds left.
Yay. Okay. So the last 2 slides are just links on where to go for more information for accessibility, especially. So that's this. I use this Paciello Group color contrast analyzer quite a lot actually now. And then this is all I have. Thank you for your time. There's my email if you have any questions at all. I love talking textbooks, so don't ever be shy about hitting me up for information. And that's it.
Great. I will see if any other questions come in real quick. You're getting a lot of thank yous. And just to let everyone know, yes, the slides are not currently available, but they will be available after the session, and they will also be available on the conference website probably sometime next week. So we want to thank you all for attending Judy's session on OER design. Please provide your feedback for this session through the survey that will pop up when you leave the session. Our next session is at 1 p.m. During this break, we encourage you to check out the meeting hub and connect with other attendees. And then to leave this session, you just click back to the timeline link up in the left-hand corner of the portal. And we thank you so much for giving us your time today. And I'm just going to check the discussion session real quick. And it's all just a bunch of thank yous. So thank you again, Judy. We appreciate it. And I know I learned a lot. So
great. Thank you.
Thank you all.